Chapter 5. The Village of Somber Bridges. If there hadn't been over 20 years of struggle between the Communists and the Nationalists, and if April 30, 1975 hadn't happened, the life of U Cho would still have been that of a farmer. Daily he would wear his black shorts, go shirtless, lead his buffalo, and carry a hoe to the fields, following in the footsteps of his ancestors like thousands of other farmers in the Khao Noi hamlet. But as the old saying goes, no one is rich for 3 generations, nor is anyone poor for 3 generations. Indeed, the life and fate of Nguyen Van Chau differed greatly from those of his great-grandfather, grandfather, and father. Cho didn't know much about his great-grandfather, but when he was about 6 or 7 years old, his grandfather often told him stories about his great-grandfather, which sounded like tales from a distant past. Chau's great-grandfather was a tenant farmer for Mr. Hoi Dong Ben. A tenant farmer means someone who rents land from Mr. Hoi Dong to cultivate rice every year. He worked 3 mao, about 1.08 hectares of land, which was enough to support a family with 1 wife and 7 children. Chau's grandfather was the eldest of those 7 children. Mr. Hoi Dong Ben was a wealthy man with wealth passed down from his ancestors. It was said that one of his ancestors held a high-ranking position during the Nguyen lord's rule, which earned him vast lands and rewards from the Nguyen dynasty. Mr. Hoi Dong Ben was perhaps destined from a previous life because he was born into wealth and never had to worry about working hard. Pampered by his parents like a noble child, Cao Hai Ben, a respectful term for the second son, was sent to Saigon to study in a French school. When he obtained the Ton Chung diploma, equivalent to a lower secondary school diploma, his parents called him back to the village to marry and help them manage their land, gardens, and houses. His new wife was a young and beautiful high school student from Long An Province, the daughter of Mr. Ka Lan from a neighboring village. The newlywed couple was well matched, and their families were highly compatible. In the southern style, their land stretched as far as the eye could see, with no end in sight. The wedding was grand, with hundreds of tenant farmers from both sides bringing chickens, ducks, and bananas, gathering together to help with the slaughter of pigs and cows, to feast the officials, local authorities, and neighbors for 3 days and nights. At that time, Cao Hai Ben and his wife were seen as highly educated individuals by the villagers. It was said that sometimes when they quarreled, they would argue in French, which sounded like popcorn popping. The French colonial authorities stationed in Can Duoc district heard of Mr. Hoi Dong Ben's wealth and education and summoned him to present himself before the French officials. Afterward, the district chief conferred upon him the title of Hoi Dong, which essentially meant a council member, a title that allowed him to attend weddings and funerals and sit in the front rows but without any real power. For this reason, the villagers no longer called him Cao Hai, but instead used the more formal and bureaucratic title of Ong Hoi Dong. Although his parents were wealthy and influential in the village, they treated the tenant farmers and servants with great kindness. When they became too old to manage their affairs, they passed everything on to Mr. Hoi Dong Ben, their only son. Mr. Hoi Dong, like his parents, was generous and kind to those around him. However, his wife was very strict and harsh with the tenant farmers working on their land. According to Chau's grandfather, after every harvest, the tenant farmers had to dry their rice and then carry it to Mr. Hoi Dong's house to pay their rent. Mrs. Hoi Dong herself would bring out a bowl of water and handpick the rice from the tenant farmers. If any grains floated to the surface, she would reject the entire load and make them take it back to remove all the bad grains before bringing it again. In years of poor harvests, she didn't care and still demanded the same quantity as in previous years. If anyone pleaded with her, explaining their family's difficulties, she would make them pay extra the following year to make up for the shortfall. Chau's great-grandfather fell into this unfortunate situation. After a flood during the Year of the Dragon, his grandfather had to eat porridge instead of rice because there wasn't enough rice that year. That was the story of Chau's great-grandfather, a tale from a few generations ago. By the time Cho came of age, Mr. and Mrs. Hoi Dong had long since passed away, leaving only the echoes of their reputation among the villagers. Chau's parents now worked on communal land which belonged to the government, not private individuals like before. After each harvest, They only had to pay taxes, making life much easier. Chow's family included his parents, 2 older brothers, and an older sister. They rented 4.5 mao, about 1.62 hectares, of communal land. Everyone worked together, and after paying the taxes, there was still enough rice left to feed the family and manage their household needs. Their house was by the canal, so after the harvest, the siblings would take turns fishing, catching shrimp, draining ponds, and selling their catch to earn extra money to help their parents. Chow's sister was married to a farmer in the upper hamlet, and his eldest brother, who was married but childless, still lived with the family. Chow was the youngest in the family. After finishing elementary school in the village, Chow had to drop out to help with farming. Around 1962-1963, President Ngo Dinh Diem's General Mobilization Order was issued, and Chow had just reached the age to perform his military service. Thus, he had to leave his family, bidding farewell to his parents and siblings, to report to the Quang Trung training camp to fulfill his military duty like all the other young men across the country. This was a significant turning point in the life of Nguyen Van Chow, a farmer. It marked a new chapter, a bold line that bridged the gap between his past and future. War is destructive, lacking morality. However, war also offers opportunities to demonstrate the caring and compassion of humanity. We don't want to say that war makes humanity progress, because it drives competition for survival. The modern world today clearly demonstrates this. Thanks to the war and President Diem's General Mobilization Order, the life of Chow, a farmer with dirt on his hands and feet, changed. A man who had spent his life in the acidic fields, up to his belly in mud, today finally had the chance to say goodbye to his pair of buffaloes and the calf that had just turned 1 year old. Every morning, he used to lead them to the fields to plow, and then bring them back home to feed them straw at night. But the saddest part for Chow was having to say goodbye to the girl next door, whom he had just started dating half a year ago. Miss Nam Lai, a young woman from the Dua hamlet, was just 18 years old. She was quite beautiful with tan skin. When she went to the market, she would let her long hair flow down her back, but when she went to plant rice, she would tie it up neatly. Chow was most enchanted when Miss Nam wore her black ao ba ba, a traditional Vietnamese outfit, hugging her small waist and rounded hips, with a small tight waist and a prominent chest. Their love story was both naive and romantic. It all started more than half a year ago, when Chow was herding his buffalo to the field to pull the dried straw back home to store for use as fuel and animal feed during the dry season. Miss Nam Lai was at the village pond, using a water bucket to draw water, when the rope holding the bucket snapped. She was struggling to figure out how to retrieve the bucket from the deep pond. By chance, Chow passed by with his buffalo, noticing her predicament. She glanced at him, perhaps wanting to ask for help but feeling too shy. Chow had admired Miss Nam Lai for a long time, but hadn't had the chance to get to know her. Being a shy young man, he often wanted to speak but didn't dare to. But today, seeing that no one was around, just Miss Nam alone at the pond, he became bolder. He mustered the courage to ask, "What are you doing here all by yourself, Miss Nam?" Seeming a bit shy, she bent down, clasping her hands between her knees, and stammered, "I over there." Chow stepped closer and saw the coconut leaf bucket floating on the water. "Oh, your rope broke. Let me get it for you." Chow quickly removed his black ao ba ba, tying it around his head like a turban to keep it from getting wet. He carefully waded into the pond, but because the water was deep and the pond's edge was steep, after only a few steps, the ground gave way, and he slipped right into the water like a car without brakes. Covered in mud from head to toe, he tried to act as if nothing had happened, and quietly swam out to retrieve the coconut leaf bucket for her. Watching from the bank, Miss Nam Lai felt a mix of pity and amusement seeing him covered in mud like a clown. She didn't dare laugh out loud, so she quickly turned away. After composing herself, she asked, "Are you okay down there?" "I'm fine. But I can't climb back up because the ground is too slippery, and there's nothing to hold on to. Could you throw me a rope and help pull me up?" Miss Nam quickly retrieved a rope. "Hold on, I'll throw you the rope. Just grab it and I'll pull you up." Chow began to climb up with her help, But after just a few steps, the rope slipped out of her hands and he fell back into the water. Frustrated, he called out, "Come on, hold on tighter." "I'm holding on as tight as I can, but it's too heavy and I can't hold on. Maybe I should tie the rope around my waist for better leverage." "Do whatever you think is best." After tying the rope tightly around her small, slender waist, she threw the other end to Cho again. This time it held better, but the outcome was quite different. On the bank, Miss Nam screamed as her entire body slowly slid down the steep bank, with no force able to stop it. Moments later, her petite figure lay fully in Chow's arms. Embarrassed and flustered, she pushed him away. "You're so strange." Chow, feeling pleased with himself, laughed and joked, "I didn't do anything." Miss Nam, still a bit angry, gave him a sideways glance. "You didn't do anything? You were holding me. Well, you fell right into my arms. If I hadn't caught you, you would have rolled into the water." Trying to make amends, Cho offered, "Let me get you some water to wash off that mud." Miss Nam Lai seemed satisfied and no longer complained. She splashed water from the coconut leaf bucket that Cho had filled, washing her face. Then she asked, "Do I still have mud on me?" Noticing that she kept speaking in the third person, Cho reminded her of his name. "My name is Chow, but everyone in the hamlet calls me Oot Chow. Don't you know?" After a long sigh, she said, "Everyone knows that. So call me Chow or Oot. It sounds strange when you keep referring to me indirectly." After the incident at the pond, over a week passed, but Oot Cho found himself missing something. Sometimes, when he herded the buffalo to the upper hamlet, he would make a point to pass by the village pond at least once a day, looking at the spot where he had once held Miss Nam in his arms due to that accidental mishap. He missed most of all her blushing pink cheeks, which looked so beautiful when she was embarrassed, and the way her chest had inadvertently pressed against his. He had wanted to hold her longer, but she had pushed him away afterward. Similarly, Miss Nam Lai's thoughts were not very different from those of Cho. At 18, just entering the prime of her youth, she had many dreams. Those fleeting, subtle thoughts of early youth, despite having caught the attention of several young men in the village, hadn't yet led her to choose anyone. But after the 1-in-1,000 years accident, she found herself often thinking about it. She started to feel a bit of affection for the young man from the lower hamlet. Today, the weather was quite pleasant. The sun wasn't too hot, and a gentle breeze rustled through the dry rice stalks which had turned pale white. Cho grabbed his fishing rod and went to dig worms to use as bait, planning to fish for ro mi, a type of fish, at the village pond. During the dry season, all the fish, including snakehead fish, roe fish, and catfish, moved from the fields to the ponds and ditches to survive until the rainy season returned, when they would go back to the fields to spawn. The village pond served as the water source for the villagers during the summer, so the banks were built high and surrounded by tram bough trees to keep animals away. No one was allowed to drain the pond to catch fish, so it was always teeming with fish of all kinds. Near the pond's edge stood a large banyan tree, known locally as the Bodhi tree. Sometimes, children from the village would come here to carve the bark with knives or pick leaves to collect sap. The sap, a white sticky substance like glue, would be dried slightly and then used to trap birds by spreading it on tree branches in the rice fields. Any unfortunate bird that landed there would be stuck and unable to move. The children or adults would then catch the bird, pluck its feathers, and roast it for a tasty snack with homemade rice wine. Under the Bodhi tree, the villagers had built a small shrine, though Cho didn't know whether it was for a god or goddess. However, on every full moon, someone would bring offerings of bananas or mangoes to the shrine. Many in the village believed in its spiritual powers, but Oot Cho had only heard the stories and didn't know much about their truth. Carrying a bamboo basket and a long bamboo fishing rod, Cho selected a good spot in the shade of the Bodhi tree to sit down. He carefully baited his hook with a worm and tied a floating cork made from a dried deen plant to his fishing line. The pond was filled with lotus leaves, some dark green and as large as a rice sifting basket. It took some effort for Cho to find a small open space to drop his baited hook. The float bobbed on the surface, and now all he had to do was wait. When the float sank below the surface, he would know that a fish had taken the bait, and then he would pull up his catch. Fishing requires patience, so while waiting for a fish to bite, he relaxed by resting his rod on the lotus leaves and pulling out a packet of salt mixed with fresh green chilies that he had prepared at home to dip his sour guava fruit. Sitting under the shade of a tree, eating sour guava dipped in chili salt while waiting for a fish to bite was one of the simple pleasures of rural life. Occasionally, the sound of fish splashing in the water made his heart race with anticipation. He imagined that the fish below must be hungry and searching for food. Sooner or later he was sure to catch a few large roe fish to take home, fry until golden, and serve with nook mam fish sauce and boiled rau newt, a type of leafy vegetable, or perhaps make a soup with den mong toy and okra. Eating it with freshly cooked rice would be so refreshing that he would dream of a carefree adventure, no hat needed. Suddenly, a loud splash sounded, and water splattered onto the nearby lotus leaves, startling him. Cho stood up, looking around. He was sure that the noise wasn't caused by fish splashing or feeding, but by someone throwing something to disturb him. Just as he was pondering this, he heard a girl's playful laughter. "Brother Oot, why are you so startled? There are no ghosts here during the day." Regaining his composure when he recognized Miss Nam Lai, Cho feigned annoyance. "Heavens! Miss Nam, I thought someone was trying to scare me away." She emerged from the trambao bushes growing near the pond and walked toward Cho. "The other day, you helped me get the bucket out of the pond, and I didn't get a chance to thank you. Today, I came here to thank you, Brother Oot." "We're neighbors, so there's no need for thanks, Miss Nam." Lai blushed slightly, speaking softly. "It wasn't just the bucket, someone fell, remember?" As she said this, Cho immediately understood her meaning and replied, "It was my fault for suggesting you tie the rope around your waist, but nothing bad happened, right?" Lai gave him a long sideways glance. "You held me, and you say nothing happened?" Hao smiled, trying to make peace with a playful tone. "So did you come here to demand compensation, Miss Nam? How about you hold me, and we'll call it even?" After Chao's playful suggestion, she quickly walked over and playfully pushed him on the shoulder. "That's a strange thing to say. Aren't you afraid people will laugh?" And so from that day on, Cho and Miss Nam Lai began secretly meeting. Sometimes, they would meet under the banyan tree by the village pond or at the Va bridge near his house to enjoy the cool breeze. Their young love blossomed as vigorously as the rice fields after being fertilized, spreading a vibrant green hue. Miss Nam Lai from the Dua hamlet brought a new vitality to Chao's life, an intoxicating feeling he had never experienced before. When they sat close, she would shyly pull away, but like a magnet he would draw closer. It wasn't that Miss Nam didn't love him and didn't want to sit close to him. Sometimes, when he pretended to be upset and moved away, she would slowly inch closer to him. She loved him very much, but her friends often gossiped about boys who would get girls pregnant and then run away, which made her afraid. Moreover, she often heard her mother say that a country girl who gets pregnant out of wedlock is a disgrace in the village, and everyone will know. The rumors will spread, and sometimes you'll have to leave the village to avoid bringing shame to the entire family. So every time she thought about it, Miss Nam felt nervous. It seems that girls or women often make decisions more with their hearts than their heads. Miss Nam knew this, but who could stop her from loving? At 18, just blossoming into womanhood, Miss Nam had become even more beautiful, like a flower blooming in early spring, with smooth tan skin from working outdoors. Her full lips were always moist and inviting, and when she smiled, 2 dimples appeared, pink like ripe mangoes, making her even more endearing. Perhaps thanks to Chao's deep affection and care, Miss Nam's figure had become even more shapely since they began their relationship. Her body developed so beautifully that it seemed her chest was about to burst through the buttons of her ao ba ba, revealing the vitality of a young woman. Her waist appeared even smaller and more delicate, making her look even more graceful and lovely. With her perfect curves and shy demeanor, Miss Nam captivated many young men in the village, each of whom secretly wished to be her lover. Their love affair remained a closely guarded secret. Although they had been together for 5 or 6 months, Miss Nam insisted that Cho not tell anyone, fearing the gossip and rumors that would spread throughout the village. If her parents found out, they might forbid her from leaving the house or going to the market freely as she had before. To reassure her, Cho swore on his life with heaven and earth as his witnesses that he would never breathe a word to anyone. Today was perhaps the saddest day in Yu Chao's life. After dinner, as the clock struck 7, he muttered to himself, "Just half an hour left," and hurriedly helped clear the dishes from the bamboo mat where the family had eaten their evening meal. Noticing his unusual behavior and silence, his sister-in-law became curious and asked, "Why have you been so quiet today, Ut? Is it because of the military draft notice that came yesterday?" Feigning a grimace, he replied, "No, it's not that, sister. I just have a slight headache from working in the sun all day without wearing a hat." "In that case, go take a bath and take some medicine. I'll take care of everything." Feeling relieved, Cho quickly ran out to the bridge over the canal to fetch water, pouring it over his head to wash away the straw dust that clung to his hair and neck, causing an itchy discomfort. Now he felt refreshed and much more comfortable. He chose a relatively new pair of shorts and a black ao-ba-ba to wear. Glancing at the clock on the post, he mumbled, 15 minutes left, I should leave now." The water level of the canal under the Va Bridge had risen above the halfway point of the bamboo poles. The Va Bridge was a small hut made of bamboo and thatched with coconut palm leaves, built by his father nearly a decade ago. It was used for fishing at night. However, in the past 2 years his father had grown old and frequently ill, so he no longer fished here, leaving the task to Cho. Because of this, Cho saw this place as the perfect secret meeting spot, thanks to its location along the canal, hidden by thick clusters of thorny bushes and towering coconut palms that obscured the entrance. Late this afternoon, the weather was beautiful, with a gentle breeze creating small ripples on the canal's surface. The coconut palms swayed, their leaves rustling together, producing a sound like rain falling on a thatched roof. After waiting for a while, Cho grew impatient, pacing back and forth on the bamboo platform, which was about 4 square meters in size. Occasionally, he craned his neck to look through the gaps in the coconut palms, as if expecting a very important visitor. He was sure it was already past 7:30 because the sun had hidden behind the bamboo groves at the end of the village, leaving only a stunning halo of golden-orange light. Each passing minute felt like an eternity. Feeling weary, Cho walked over to the corner of the hut and pulled on the lac hammock. Just as he lay down, a loud thud echoed from the roof of the hut, as if someone had thrown something as a signal or to play a prank. Cho jumped up, relieved and excited, and called out, "It's okay. Come in." This was the secret code that Cho and Miss Nam had agreed upon. He was afraid that someone might catch them meeting in the hut, so to be safe, Miss Nam would throw something as a signal to let him know she was there. When she heard his voice from inside the hut, Miss Nam cautiously looked around to ensure no neighbors were watching. Then Cho rushed out, grabbed her hand and led her inside. "Heavens! I've been waiting for you so long I almost ran out of breath." Miss Nam playfully tugged on his hand. "Don't you know? My mother kept asking questions. After dinner, I had to pretend to go to Uncle Tu's house to borrow some black thread for sewing, so I could come here to meet you. So what's so important that you needed to see me?" With a slightly sad expression, Cho slowly replied, "There is something important, which is why I asked you to come here." He reached out and pulled her onto the lac hammock with him. "I received a draft notice from the village yesterday. They're calling me for military service." Miss Nam was startled, staring at her lover. "You've been drafted?" "Yes, the village is calling me to report for military service." "Where will you be stationed?" "I don't know yet." "When do you have to leave?" "Tomorrow I have to go to the village, and they'll tell me." Miss Nam's face fell, a deep sadness washing over her. It was as if she was about to lose something she had long cherished. She sat in silence, staring down at the bamboo platform, her hands clasped tightly together. Her long black hair, shiny with coconut oil, fell over her shoulders, partially obscuring her face. Cho gently slipped his hand through her hair, resting it on her smooth shoulder, and pulled her close. "Are you sad because I'm going to the army?" With a slight wriggle, she replied softly, just loud enough for him to hear, "And then you'll forget about me, won't you?" To reassure her, he pulled her back onto his lap and kissed her softly on the cool cheek. "Who said I'd forget about you? Caught off guard by his sudden kiss, Miss Nam tried to push him away and sit up, but Cho held her tightly around the waist, so she resigned herself to lying in his arms. "You'd better be careful. Someone might see us." Outside, the night was completely still. The dim light of twilight was gradually being replaced by darkness. A few pairs of white storks hurried back to their nests, and occasionally the soft plop of fish feeding on the surface of the canal could be heard. The Vawbridge hut was an inanimate object, but it had witnessed the deepening bond between the two lovers over the past 6 months. It had seen every moment of passion, every tender caress, and every gentle kiss shared by Cho and Miss Nam. Their love had blossomed so strongly, like a lush green field of rice, that they had begun to hope for a simple wedding. Perhaps one day the villagers would whisper among themselves, praising the match. "That Oot boy from Zom Khao Noi is lucky to have married Miss Nam Lai from Zom Dua." Today is the graduation day for the new conscripts at the Quang Trung military training camp. The sun seemed to rise earlier than usual. By 7 o'clock, sunlight had already streamed through the gaps in the canvas tents pitched on the concrete yard. Nearby stood the old brick barracks of the officers and instructors. Everyone was busy checking their uniforms and gear, making sure everything was in order for the flag-raising ceremony and the commander's graduation speech. Since leaving Zom Khao Noi 3 months ago, Oot Cho had undergone a complete transformation, almost like shedding his old skin. Even his name had changed. No one in the training camp called him Oot as his family and Miss Nam Lai used to. They all called him by his given name, Cho. In the early days, he found it strange not to be called by his familiar nickname, but he gradually grew accustomed to it, finding it better than the name Oot, which had been given to him as the youngest child in the family. Before he left, he remembered how his mother had sold several sacks of rice to buy him a new Western-style outfit and a brand new pair of Japanese sandals. Miss Nam Lai had secretly given him a white handkerchief embroidered with yellow plum blossoms and 2 birds perched on a branch. She had carefully sprinkled it with jasmine-scented perfume so that he would remember her always, even when he was far away. When he first arrived at the training camp, he had to go collect his military gear, including a steel helmet, mess kit, uniform, and combat boots. But the hardest part was getting used to wearing the military boots. Having grown up in the countryside, he had only ever gone barefoot. On rare occasions like weddings, funerals, or the first day of Tet, he might wear sandals to appear more refined, but he had never worn shoes. Moreover, in the rainy season, the mud was so thick that it was impossible to wear shoes or sandals. And in the dry season, the fields were cracked with large fissures and holes big enough to twist an ankle, so going barefoot was the most practical option. As a result, the soles of his feet were thick with calluses, cracked and stained yellow with acidic soil. Whenever he put on the military boots, he felt uncomfortable, hot, and painful, wanting to take them off immediately. But the drill instructors insisted that everyone had to wear the boots during training unless they were injured or had a doctor's permission. After about a week, he began to get used to it, and even started to appreciate how the yellow stains had almost completely disappeared from his feet, leaving them relatively smooth and much more presentable than before. After nearly half an hour of standing in formation at the flagpole, listening to the commander's speech about the duties and responsibilities of a soldier, the morning sun had flooded the parade ground. Although the new recruits were eager for the ceremony to end, they stood tall and attentively absorbed the final words of advice from their commanding officer before heading off to join the war. In just a short while, each new soldier would receive a special leave to visit their family before reporting to their new unit. Outside the camp gate, a crowd of relatives eagerly awaited their loved ones. Cho knew that none of them were there for him. His parents were too old and weak, and his siblings were too busy with farming to make the journey. They were tied to their land, spending their entire lives in the hamlet. The bustling cities of Saigon and Cho Lan seemed distant and daunting to them, filled with deceit and temptation. More than once in the village, he heard people recount the story of Aunt Hai, the daughter of Mrs. Tam from the upper hamlet, who went to Cholan to sell flowers. She was pickpocketed and lost all her money and had to return home in tears with nothing but empty hands. Not long after that, a few months later, Aunt Hai ran away with a man to Saigon, and to this day no one knows where she is. That was all to the story, but the villagers exaggerated it with added details, spreading gossip throughout the entire hamlet. Mrs. Tam, upset and missing her daughter, as well as frustrated by the exaggerated rumors that tarnished her family's reputation, fell ill and passed away within less than a year. After receiving his special graduation pass, Cho eagerly returned to the camp to pack everything into his military backpack. He slung it over his shoulder and made his way to the gate to catch a three-wheeled taxi to the bus station in Cholon, where he would take a bus to the countryside. The bus on the Cholon-Rachdao-Can Duok route was already full. The driver honked the horn loudly to signal that the bus was about to depart. Cho was still wearing his brand-new green military uniform from the graduation ceremony that morning. The bus conductor invited him to sit in the front row. As we know, on buses heading to the countryside, the front seats near the driver are considered honor seats for those who are well-dressed, while the back seats are mostly for vendors or people in shabby clothing. The bus had just left Phu Lam, nearing Mui Tao, and the houses along the road began to thin out. Fields of rice about to sprout swayed gently in the breeze, their vibrant green stretching out to the horizon. In the relatively soft seat made of white and blue nylon strands, Cho pulled down the brim of his military cap to block the light from outside, trying to catch a short nap. Water hyacinth is considered a type of aquatic plant like water spinach, water mimosa, and yellow velvet leaf, but it's different from edible plants like water mimosa, which usually need to be planted and anchored in rivers, ponds, or ditches to stay in one place. In contrast, no one has ever heard of people eating water hyacinth. Perhaps that's why no one pays attention to this wild plant. However, the slightly strange thing is that when water hyacinth blooms, it looks quite beautiful. The delicate petals, in shades of white, blue, and a hint of purple, rise above the dense green leaves below. Village children often wade into the water to pick these flowers and display them in vases at home. Where fate would take Wu Chao's life no one could predict, much like the water hyacinth. It originated from some stream, drifting aimlessly year after year through rain and sun, only seeing clusters of thorny bushes or floating patches of duckweed slowly dying over time. Cho was aware of this, but with his basic education and understanding, he couldn't think much beyond accepting his fate, just like all the neighbors around him. His only dream was that if he had a good harvest, he could save enough money to marry Miss Nam Lai. Then daily life would follow the footsteps of his ancestors. On the dry field and the wet field, husband plows, wife plants the buffalo harrows. That would be happiness. But sometimes life isn't as simple as Cho imagined. As the old saying goes, man proposes, God disposes. People can plan whatever they want, but the outcome is mostly determined by fate and the universe. Whether the old saying is entirely true or not, in Cho's life, there was an almost coincidental turn of events. Cho had to temporarily leave Zom Khao Noi to join the army, something he had never thought of before. Lost in a daydream, Cho imagined meeting Miss Nam Lai again, giving her long kisses on her rosy cheeks, and telling her the hardships of a soldier's life, like in the Kai Luang traditional opera plays he had heard at Mr. Hai Jio's house, or even more romantically, like the love songs of Hun Quang and Mai La Huyen he had heard at the district market. An la lin da tin. Tin an la tin lin. I am a romantic soldier. My love is the love of a soldier. He thought Miss Nam Lai would admire him, and love him even more because being a soldier is heroic, not cowardly or weak like the men dodging the draft at the market. Just as his dream was about to end, the bus suddenly braked, throwing him forward. The bus conductor, hanging onto the back of the stairs, shouted loudly, "At Bin Chan intersection, does anyone want to get off?" Hearing no response, the driver slowly turned left toward Khao Tram. The long road, passing through various villages and connecting districts, was poorly maintained. Each year in the summer, road workers would dig up soil from the fields to fill the sunken spots caused by the rainy season. Because of this, there were many potholes, some larger than a rice winnowing basket, so every time the bus hit one, it felt like the whole bus was about to tip over. Moreover, each time the bus stopped to pick up or drop off passengers, a thick cloud of red dust would rise, forcing everyone to cover their noses and mouths to avoid inhaling the suffocating dust. However, all the passengers were used to it after traveling on this route many times, and no one seemed to mind or complain. Over an hour later, after passing Na Tu Zoi Doi, Rach Keen and Khao Dan, the bus finally arrived at Rach Dao bus station. Cho slung his backpack over his shoulder and made his way to the horse-drawn carriage station to hitch a ride back to Zom Khao Noi. The sun was already low in the sky, around 3 in the afternoon. He planned to get off near Miss Nam's house first, then walk home afterward. But the difficult part for him was how to arrange a meeting with Miss Nam this evening at the fishing hut, as they used to do. He suddenly came up with an idea. Write a note clearly stating the time and place, then crumple it and toss it to her as he walked by, hoping no one would notice. He smiled to himself, thinking it was the best plan. As the carriage stopped at the entrance of the alley, he saw the red-tiled roof of Miss Nam's house behind a bamboo grove, a field away. Suddenly, he felt nervous, his heart pounding in his chest, worrying whether Miss Nam was home or not. He tried to stay calm, carrying his backpack straight along the edge of the field, past the bamboo grove in front of her house. A black dog sleeping on the porch spotted him and ran out to the entrance, barking loudly. Fearing the dog might bite, he hurried his pace, but still kept an eye on the house. He didn't see anyone, only hearing Miss Nam's mother scolding the dog for barking at nothing. Returning to the road, he thought, I can't let a dog get the better of me, can I? Maybe I should try again. He decided to risk it and walked the same path again. The black dog ran out and barked just as before, but this time he didn't walk quickly. He stopped and stomped his foot, yelling at the dog, hoping Miss Nam would hear him outside. After a moment of tension, Miss Nam's mother yelled at the dog again from inside the house. Hearing her voice, the dog tucked its tail and slunk back inside. Cho didn't see any sign of Miss Nam and felt disappointed as he shouldered his backpack and continued home along the edge of the field. After crossing a few fields, he noticed someone in the distance, a woman wearing a conical hat and carrying a water jug walking toward him. Cho stopped to put his bag down, rubbed his eyes, and thought, could that be Miss Nam Lai? Sure enough, it was her, bringing water to the people spreading fertilizer in the fields. She was returning home. What an unexpected and fortunate encounter, he thought. He smiled to himself, remembering how close he had come to being bitten by the dog at the bamboo grove near her house. Upon seeing Cho, Miss Nam was overjoyed. However, to maintain discretion in the village, she only asked a few simple questions, then took the note from him and hurried home with the water jug. After a long period of basic military training at the Quang Trung camp, Cho had learned not only the basics of military skills like marching, crawling, assembling and disassembling automatic weapons, and practicing shooting on the range, but he had also been taught military discipline, including military conduct and the psychology of political warfare. Thanks to this experience, Cho had become more knowledgeable. Now he understood who the night men, or 30 men, as the villagers used to call them, really were. They were actually communist cadres operating in the area, conducting propaganda against the South Vietnamese government at night. During his leave, Cho impressed Miss Nam, who was amazed and admired him more and more. She was surprised by the knowledge he had gained since leaving Zom Khao Noi. But what she liked most were the times they met, when Cho would wear Western-style clothes and polished leather shoes, looking and smelling as clean as the school teachers at the district market, and like the old days when he wore shorts, a black ao ba ba, and went barefoot, reeking of acidic mud and swamp. Today was their final meeting. Early tomorrow morning, Cho had to return to camp to receive his orders and report to his new unit. During the family dinner, his brothers and sister-in-law hosted a farewell meal for their youngest sibling. The meal included local delicacies, sour soup with flowers and dried mai to fish, crispy fried fish with green chili fish sauce, grilled snakehead fish with basil, and boiled water mimosa dipped in fermented anchovy sauce. But the most special and surprising thing was the rice. Somehow, his siblings had found some nong tom fragrant rice for Cho to enjoy. As the family sat around the mat in the front yard, as usual, his eldest brother removed the lid from the earthen pot, releasing steam and a fragrant aroma that filled the air. Even before tasting it, everyone was already praising the rice. Cho, surprised, asked. Wow, we've never had this kind of rice before. Where did this come from? His eldest brother smiled mysteriously. You're right, little brother. We can't usually afford this kind of rice. But today, we wanted to give you a memorable meal before you head off to the army, so your sister-in-law went ahead and bought 2 liters of this rice at the market for you. Cho turned to his kind sister-in-law. Why did you spend so much on this rice? I would have eaten anything. She replied, You're our youngest brother, and everyone in this family loves you. We wanted to give you something special before you leave for the army. It's not like we can do this every day. The family dinner was joyful and satisfying. Cho and his 2 older brothers had almost finished 2 quarts of the finest Hakmon rice wine, purchased from Mrs. Hai's shop along the dirt road. Chow had downed over 2 large oxhorn glasses of rice wine. His face was a bit flushed, and his heart was beating faster than usual, but he still remembered the important meeting he had with Miss Nam at 7 that evening. After the family dinner, he pretended he needed to visit Mrs. Hai's shop to buy a few things for his early departure the next day. The vast fields in front of him, with their green rice stalks just beginning to bud, made him feel calm. The evening was still early, and he leisurely strolled through the fields toward the riverbank. As he walked, his thoughts drifted. He realized that his life was about to change, leaving behind the plows, the vegetable patches, the okra rows, and the water buffaloes he had known so well. And then there was Miss Nam, his first love from Zomdua. What force was pulling him away from all these things that had bound his family and ancestors to this remote village for generations? To push aside these vague, unsettling thoughts, he bent down and carefully plucked a large rice stalk, its swollen belly as thick as a finger. He gently peeled away the husk, revealing a cluster of tender green rice grains full of sweet juice. He popped them into his mouth, savoring the sweetness and delicate aroma of the young rice, still in its early stages of development. The taste brought him a sense of joy and comfort. Just as he was about to pick another stalk, he heard a soft voice behind a nearby cluster of thorny pineapple plants teasing him. Picking young rice? I'm going to tell the landowner. Like a child caught stealing candy, Cho quickly stood up straight and turned around. When he heard the voice, he knew it was Miss Nam, playing a trick on him, so he pretended not to know. Who's hiding back there? If you don't come out, I'll throw mud at you. Miss Nam had been hiding to scare him, but when she heard the threat of mud throwing, she stepped out from behind the pineapple plants and playfully scolded him. Stealing my rice and you're not even ashamed. Now you want to throw mud too. Chow pretended to deny it. I thought it was someone else. Who would have thought it was you hiding in there? After a long, playful glance, she retorted. HMPH. You knew all along. The fishing hut once again served as the silent witness to the secret love between the village girl and the neighboring boy. Cho gently guided her to lie down on the rattan hammock where they had first met during their initial secret rendezvous. As soon as she lay down, she pulled him down to join her on the hammock. Not paying attention, he lost his balance and fell on top of her. The hammock tilted to one side, causing the buttons on her blouse to accidentally pop open, as Cho instinctively grabbed at them to keep from falling to the floor. Miss Nam blushed with embarrassment. She quickly tried to cover herself, but it was too late. Her ample, smooth breasts, untouched by anyone, were now fully exposed as if challenging Cho. What had just happened was so sudden and unexpected that Cho was a bit flustered. However, he couldn't deny the wonderful sensation of having his face nestled against those warm, soft mounds. He tried to make amends. It's your fault for pulling me down without warning. Miss Nam remained calm, lying there with her cheeks turning a lovely shade of pink. Are you sure it wasn't your fault? Chow smiled and whispered softly into her ear, Let me help you button up. Miss Nam didn't say a word. She simply reached up, wrapped her arms around his shoulders, and pulled him closer. Although Cho was 2 years older than Miss Nam, he was still shy and reserved when it came to girls. To be honest, he was afraid of getting a girl pregnant. What would he do if that happened? The neighbors would call him a scoundrel and a fool, so even though he desired it, he held back in the face of temptation. Miss Nam's feelings weren't much different. Her parents constantly reminded her, A girl must wait for a proper proposal with betel leaves and areca nuts brought by a matchmaker. You can't meet boys at the crossroads or in the alleys, or if you get pregnant out of wedlock, the whole village will gossip about our family and we'll be disgraced. There was even a time when a rooster crowed at noon in the village. That alone sparked enough gossip for the entire village. People said that a rooster crowing at noon was a bad omen, a sign that some girl in the village would soon get pregnant out of wedlock. Then they would whisper and speculate, saying things like, "I bet it's that girl too, she's always giving the teacher those flirtatious looks," or "That girl Sow has been fooling around with that guy Hai." Remembering these stories made Miss Nam nervous. She didn't want to go any further with Cho beyond the tender kisses, caresses, and embraces they shared when they were together. The hammock swayed gently back and forth, creaking rhythmically as it rocked. Cho remained silent, his eyes closed, with his face resting on the warm bare chest of his beloved. Feeling the quickening heartbeat and breathing, Miss Nam softly reminded him, "When you're far away, don't forget about me, okay?" Lost in the sensation of holding this rare, precious land in his arms, Cho could only nod gently in response. This didn't satisfy Miss Nam, as she wanted him to look her in the eyes and give her a more reassuring answer. She quickly pushed him up, catching him off guard. "What are you doing?" Playfully she scolded him. "Did you even hear what I said?" "Yes, of course. I promise that no matter where I am, I will always remember you. I swear by the heavens, if I don't keep my word, may I be struck down by lightning," he replied, trying to reassure her. Miss Nam, now satisfied, smiled. "Really?" "Really." After rebuttoning her blouse, she said, "It's getting late. I should go. When will you get leave again?" "I don't know, but I'll let you know when I do." As she got off the hammock, she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear to keep it from getting tangled. Cho, standing behind her, wrapped his arms around her slender waist, holding her tightly. "When I finish my service, I'll go home and tell my parents to sell a calf so I can marry you." Miss Nam turned around and gently patted his back, showing her gratitude. After reporting for duty in Saigon, Cho was given an assignment, along with a group of 10 other new recruits, to go to Ban Mi Thuat and report to the personnel office of the 23rd Infantry Division stationed there. Cho was originally supposed to be assigned to a unit in the 3rd or 4th Military Region near his hometown, but during his training at the Quang Trung camp, he became close friends with Vo Von Tan, another recruit like him. Tan had been a coffee farmer in Ban Mi Thuat before being drafted, and they met at the Quang Trung Training Center. Because they shared similar backgrounds in farming, they quickly became friends. Tan was kind and generous, often sharing dried fruits and snacks sent by his parents from Ban Mi Thuat. Sometimes Tan would tell Cho about mischievous but exciting stories, like sneaking around to watch Montagnard girls bathe in the streams. Chow's favorite story was about the half-French, half-Thai girls, with their creamy white skin, shaped like the most beautiful flowers in the forest. Whenever Tan talked about them, Cho couldn't help but think of Miss Nam Lai, his girlfriend back home. But all of this was just a small part of the reason he decided to choose this unit. The most important reason was that he wanted to see a place different from the vast fields where there were only 2 seasons each year: the rainy season, when the fields flooded, and the dry season when the land cracked. It was the same cycle every year, with nothing new or exciting. He wanted to see mountains, forests, tigers, leopards, deer, and bears, rather than the old buffaloes, black dogs, and tabby cats back home. At 20, the desire for adventure and discovery was strong in him, like an eagle wanting to leave its nest and spread its wings to explore the vast sky. Wu Cho was a reflection of that awakening. His family had lived in the same place for generations, from his great-grandfather to his grandfather, to his father, none of whom ever thought of leaving the bamboo groves and the old shrine by the village pond to venture into what people called a place where the wild birds and animals live, a place of jungle and wilderness. Perhaps it was due to an inherited timidity, a mindset that valued safety and comfort, typical of the rural farming folk. They feared throwing away the bird in hand to catch the one in the bush, so they preferred to stick to their muddy fields where they had a guaranteed livelihood, rather than wander off to an unknown land. Thanks to the military, Wu Cho now had the opportunity to break away. To be honest, He wasn't completely unafraid of leaving his homeland and village, especially leaving his girlfriend, Miss Nam Lai. But he believed that after his military service, he would be discharged, return home, marry, and live his life there. Still lost in thought about the journey ahead, Tan suddenly came up from behind and patted him on the shoulder. "Hey Cho, put that assignment order away and come on, the military truck is waiting outside." Curious, Cho asked. "We're going by truck? Is Ban Mi Thuat far?" "Ban Mi Thuat is really far. I don't know if we're going by truck or by plane. Let's get on the truck, and the squad leader will let us know." With his backpack on his shoulder, Cho followed his friend. A convoy of 10-wheeled military trucks was lined up outside the camp gate. Cho nudged Tan. "Hey Tan, how do we know which truck is ours?" "I don't know. We'll ask the driver when we get there." Just then they noticed a senior soldier, a sergeant, looking very dignified, stepping down from the front seat of a truck. He held a stack of papers in his hand and looked at the two new recruits approaching. "Are you Vo Von Tan and Nguyen Von Chow?" "Yes, sir." "Get on the truck. We've been waiting for you two to complete the group." The military truck left the convoy and drove through the city streets. The group of over 10 new recruits sat silently, each lost in their own thoughts, looking around the city as if they were soulless bodies. After about 15 minutes, the truck stopped in front of a camp gate. The military policeman on guard leaned out from the sentry post as the driver handed him a piece of paper, probably the military transportation order. After a quick glance and a look at the new recruits in the back, he returned the paper and waved them through. Cho, looking confused, turned to Tan. "Are they taking us to another camp?" "I think we're going to Ban Mi Thuat. We're being transported there." The truck continued past rows of old brick buildings, probably built during the French colonial period. On both sides of the road were lush trees with branches spreading out over the pavement. Suddenly, Cho noticed 3 soldiers on the left side of the road, wearing army green jumpsuits with small guns and ammunition belts strapped around their waists. Chow lightly nudged Tan's thigh. "Hey Tan, look at those soldiers. Their uniforms are weird, the shirt and pants are connected." After a moment of observation, Tan shook his head. "I don't know. Maybe they're special forces. That's why they wear jumpsuits for easy movement." The military truck slowed down and eventually stopped on an empty concrete lot. The sergeant in front opened the door and ordered, "We're here, get off the truck." Over a dozen new recruits, moving like machines, shouldered their backpacks and jumped off the truck, following the sergeant's lead. An unusual sight caught Chow's eye as he stared at the C-47 aircraft parked nearby. Tan, carrying his backpack, slowed down to let Cho catch up. "Hey Cho, we're flying, not taking a truck." Chow hurried forward, excited. "We're flying? It must feel strange when it takes off and lands, like a roller coaster, right?" Tan, who seemed more knowledgeable because he had worked on fields near the Phung Duc airfield, where he occasionally saw Vietnam Airlines civilian planes taking off and landing, dreamed of one day saving enough money to take a flight to Nha Trang just for the experience. "Yeah. Flying is like riding a bus going up and down hills. It makes your stomach drop. I've never seen a plane this big before. I've only seen them flying high in the sky. Sometimes, in my village, we see old District of Columbia 3s flying low, dropping leaflets, but nothing this big." Still puzzled, Cho scratched his head. "Hey Tan, it looks like it's made of metal, probably aluminum or steel. How can something so heavy fly in the sky? I always thought planes were made of paper or fabric to keep them light. The Americans and the French are amazing, aren't they?" "Yeah. It looks like we're flying in this one." As the 2 young soldiers continued their conversation, the sergeant ordered the group to halt while he ran to the plane to check if they were on the correct flight. A moment later, he returned and lined up the group in pairs, leading them to the plane that Tan and Cho had just been discussing. Once the flight attendant seated everyone on the plane, Cho noticed the 3 soldiers in jumpsuits, whom he had seen earlier, also boarding the plane. One of them asked the flight attendant, who was busy inside, "Are all the passengers on board, Mr. Hung?" "Yes, sir, everyone's on board." "Signal the runway that we're ready to start the engines." After that, The three soldiers entered the cockpit. Cho, surprised, whispered to Tan, "Are those guys the pilots?" "Yeah, probably. But they're officers, so why don't they wear any rank insignia? The officers we've seen wear their ranks and medals proudly. These guys are so casual, wearing jumpsuits." Trying to show some understanding, Cho added, "The officers we've seen were combat soldiers, while these guys probably just fly planes and don't engage in combat." Chow had barely finished his sentence when Tan objected, "They do fight. Haven't you heard of fighter planes dropping bombs during the war with the Japanese and the French?" Their conversation was interrupted by the roar of the engines starting. The entire plane vibrated slightly with the high RPMs of the propellers outside. Cho looked out through the small window as the plane began to taxi to the runway. A few minutes later, the plane braked suddenly, pushing the passengers forward. As everyone regained their balance in their seats, the engines roared even louder. The plane, now like a powerful beast, charged down the runway. The passengers were pushed back by the centrifugal force. Cho closed his eyes and covered his ears with his fingers, bending down to the floor of the plane. The whooshing sound of the wheels against the runway stopped. The entire plane lifted gently, like a paper kite. The plane calmly ascended into the sky, like an arrow shot from the ground. A moment later, the plane leveled off, and Tan, sitting next to Cho, leaned close to his ear and whispered, "Hey, look out the window." Chow sat up and leaned to look down below. "Wow. The houses and fields are so tiny. I can't see anyone at all. We're too high up. You can't see anyone from here." This was the first time in Chow's life that he had flown on a plane, so everything seemed strange and impressive to him. "I always thought only the Americans and the French flew planes, but I never knew that Vietnamese people could fly too. What kind of soldiers are these pilots?" Tan, seizing the opportunity to show Cho that he knew a bit more about the military, replied, "I heard they're from the Air Force at Ton Sun Nyat." "Oh, Air Force, Navy and Army, just like we learned in training at Quang Trung. I've forgotten most of it already. Air Force flies planes, Navy sails ships, and Army fights on land like us." After explaining this to himself, Cho was still curious and asked, "Is it hard to become a pilot?" "Who knows? I've always heard about pilots flying planes, but I've never seen one before. This is my first time seeing them too. I noticed they dress differently and seem to be bigger than us." The two young conscripted soldiers, fresh from the fields, were experiencing life outside their village for the first time, like fawns exploring a new world. Everything was new and fascinating to them, contrary to all the fears that people in their village had talked about. They had heard that being a soldier was dangerous, with the risk of being crippled or killed. Many families, grandparents, and parents would refuse to marry their daughters to soldiers, fearing they would become widows too soon. They preferred to find sons-in-law who were teachers, exempt from military service, or at least the Chinese shopkeepers at the market, or even better, farmers. But sometimes, the reality was quite different. Many country girls didn't agree with their parents' choices. Some were actually attracted to soldiers. With their short haircuts, neat uniforms, and pistols at their hips, they looked heroic. Especially the young officers with their shiny gold epaulets on their collars, who were charming and often had many girls pursuing them like flies to honey. The noise from the engines outside seemed to have diminished as the plane banked to the left, avoiding low clouds near the mountain peaks. The road from Con Duong to Ban Mi Thuat was clearly visible below. A few minutes later, the C-47 landed safely, taxiing to the military aircraft parking area at Phuong Duc Airfield. The sergeant who was in charge of the group unbuckled his seatbelt and jumped down first. He ordered the new recruits to stand in one place while he arranged for transportation to take them to the 23rd Infantry Division. Cho slung his backpack over his shoulder and followed Tan into the shade of a corrugated iron building. "It's really hot here." "Yeah, we're in the mountains and forests. No flooded fields like back home." Tan pointed toward Con Duong. "See all those mountains? Beyond those ridges is Ninh Hoa, and then Nha Trang. The climate is more pleasant there because it's near the coast." This was the first time Cho had ever seen a landscape of mountains and forests, stretching endlessly before him. Up until now, he had only imagined such a scene from colorful landscape paintings sold at the market. "Hey Tan, there must be a lot of elephants and tigers here, right? I've never seen tigers, just heard about them. But I've seen elephants occasionally, used for logging. I heard that King Bao Dai used to have a vacation home near Lac Thien Lake, and he would come here to hunt and relax." As the two friends talked to pass the time, the sergeant returned and informed them that in a little while, a military truck would come to take them to the 23rd Infantry Division's headquarters. After reporting to the division's personnel office, Tan and Chow were assigned to the Ban Mi Thuat subdistrict to reinforce the militia unit stationed at an outpost protecting the perimeter of the L-19 airfield, right on the edge of the city. Second Lieutenant Tran Von Tien was their platoon leader. Tien was a young reserve officer, newly graduated from the Tu Duc Military Academy, who had been transferred here just over 2 months ago. Tien was quite surprised when Chow reported in, noting that he was from Rachdao Village, Can Duoc District, Long An Province. Tien pointed to a stool in front of the desk. "Chow, you can sit down there. You said you're from Rachdao Village?" "Yes, Lieutenant. I'm from Rachdao Village, but I live in the Khao Noi hamlet and work in the fields, not in Rachdao Market. So why didn't you request a transfer to the south? Why did you come here?" Hesitating for a moment, with his hands intertwined, he replied slowly, "I wanted to see new places and gain new experiences." Tien laughed lightly. "You have an adventurous spirit. My hometown is also Rachdao Village, like yours. My parents own a fabric and clothing shop at the market. When I was young, I attended elementary school there, and later, my father sent me to Saigon to study at Sao Thang Technical School. After graduating from high school, I was drafted and went to Tu Duc, and after graduation, I was posted here." With Tien's open and friendly manner, Chow felt very comfortable and wanted to learn more. "So, Lieutenant, when did you attend Rachdao School?" "I think it was around 1947 to 1952. As if he had just realized a surprising coincidence, Chow happily exclaimed, "I also studied during that time." Then Chow suddenly paused. It seemed there was a gap between him and his platoon leader, Second Lieutenant Tien. Chow's voice softened and became more subdued. "But after finishing elementary school, my parents were poor, so I had to quit and return home to work in the fields." Sensing Chow's feelings of inferiority due to his poor circumstances, Tien quickly changed the subject to avoid deepening the embarrassment of his less fortunate fellow villager. "Have you married yet, Chow?" "No, Lieutenant, I haven't." Lieutenant Tien laughed, half joking. "In that case, one of these days when I'm free, I'll introduce you to some girls from the rear to get to know. The school girls here are very fair-skinned and lovely, but be careful or you might get stuck with one for good." Chow found Tien's joke amusing. "Lieutenant, you're kidding. I don't dare to approach them. They'd likely scorn a low-ranking soldier like me and embarrass you." Remembering some unfinished paperwork on his desk, Tien stood up and stepped forward. "Oh, have you and Tan received your bedding and everything else you need?" "Yes, we have." "Good. Now go report to Sergeant Min, my deputy platoon leader, who will assign you both your daily duties. If you have any questions, feel free to come to see me anytime." Chow respectfully stood up straight and saluted his commanding officer before heading out. The weather in Ban Mi Thuat was beautiful today, as if to make up for the drizzling rain that had soaked the ground for days on end. During times like this, Chow finally understood why Lieutenant Tien called Ban Mi Thuat the land of eternal sadness, or the city of dust in the sun and mud in the rain. There were days when Chow sat alone with his rifle, keeping watch in a guard tower. Below him, rows of rubber trees stretched out in a lush green expanse, blending with the misty mountain ranges that appeared and disappeared through the fine mist, giving the landscape a ghostly, cool feel characteristic of the Central Highlands. These moments often reminded him of home, his family, friends, and especially Miss Nam from his hamlet, Zom Dua. It had been more than 7 months since he left his love at Khao Va. When he inquired with his comrades, he learned that it might be possible to visit home once a year, if at all. Sometimes they were put on alert and could not leave the unit. Chow thought that with time he would get used to it. He mused that maybe fate would have him grow roots here, like some of his friends who were from Kamau but now had wives and children here. But Chow believed he wouldn't follow in their footsteps because he had promised Miss Nam that he would marry her after his military service ended. He was sure she would remember and wait for his return. Chow had even asked Lieutenant Tien about the duration of military service. Tien had only shaken his head, unable to give a precise answer. He had promised to inform Chow as soon as any discharge papers arrived, and that was all. Seeing the warm sunshine, Chow took his army blanket out to dry on the fence. At that moment, Lieutenant Tien drove up in a jeep and stopped next to him. "Hey Chow, do you have anything to do this morning?" "No, Lieutenant, I'm off duty today." "Want to come with me to the L-19 airfield?" "If you want me to, I'll go." "Go put your boots on, I'll wait." About 10 minutes later, the two were at the helicopter and L-19 airfield in the city. Tien stopped the jeep near the guard station and told Chow to stay with the vehicle while he went into the communication center for some business. Nearby, Chow noticed a few soldiers who seemed to be preparing an observation aircraft parked there. Curious, he wandered over to take a closer look. After a quick inspection of the plane, he struck up a conversation. "Is this what they call the old lady plane?" One of the aircraft mechanics turned and smiled. "Yeah. The locals used to call this the old lady, but we in the Air Force call it the L-19 observation plane." "So you guys are Air Force mechanics?" "Yep. We're non-commissioned officers and aircraft mechanics." Chow looked surprised. "All this time I thought only the French or Americans did the repairs, not our Vietnamese." "In the old days the French did the repairs, but now it's our Air Force." "I've heard people go to Saigon to learn car mechanics, but where do you learn to fix airplanes?" Seeing that the young soldier was genuinely interested in their profession, the Air Force mechanic wiped his oil-stained hands with a rag and introduced each of his colleagues. "That guy over there is Senior Sergeant Tan, a radio specialist. The one over there working on the engine is Sergeant Tu, an engine specialist, and I'm Master Sergeant Hung, the team leader on the airfield." When Hung finished the introductions, Chow felt a bit embarrassed about addressing them casually as brother. "Sorry, I didn't know your rank, Master Sergeant, so I called you brother." Hung patted Chow on the shoulder, smiling warmly. "In the Air Force, we care more about mutual respect than about strict formalities like other branches. You can call me brother or Master Sergeant, it's all good." "Thank you, Master Sergeant." Hung continued answering Chow's earlier question. "Most of us in aircraft maintenance are sent to the United States for specialized training for about a year or longer, depending on the field. Then we return to Vietnam to serve in the Air Force." Hung pointed to each of his colleagues and added, "Like Senior Sergeant Tan over there, he just returned from the US a little over a month ago. Sergeant Tu and I are scheduled to go next year." "So the Air Force doesn't fight like we do, right, Master Sergeant?" "Of course they do. The pilots of helicopters, fighter jets, and L-19s fly into battle all the time. The difference is that you fight on the ground, and they fight in the air. As for us, our job is to maintain the planes in top condition so they can fly out and fight or provide air support when under attack." Feeling like he was talking too much, Hung patted Chow on the shoulder again and asked, "And you're serving in the militia here, right?" "Yes, I'm doing my military service and was transferred here. I'm stationed at an outpost along the airfield perimeter. The lieutenant you saw earlier is my platoon leader." "Yes, I know Lieutenant Tien. He often drives in here to inquire about the security situation around the airfield." On the way back to the outpost, they stopped at a cafe for breakfast. While waiting for their food, Chow shared his earlier conversation with Tien. "When you went into the communication center at the airfield, I made friends with some Air Force mechanics. They're really skilled. They even went to the US for training. I remember that back home, only the rich and powerful, like the village chiefs or large landowners, could afford to send their children to study in France." Lieutenant Tien nodded as he sipped his hot coffee. "Yeah, you're right. Most Air Force personnel are non-commissioned officers or skilled technicians. They have specialized skills, not like us infantry soldiers." "So why didn't you join the Air Force, Lieutenant?" After graduating from high school, I applied for flight training in NHA Trang, but my mother raised a fuss, saying it was too dangerous. Planes get shot down easily and all that. She insisted that I continue my studies to get a draft deferment. In the end, I had to listen to her, giving up on the Air Force and ending up at Duc. After answering and seeing that Chow was interested in the Air Force, Tien suddenly asked, "And what about you? Would you like to join the Air Force?" Chow hesitated, scratching his head. "How could I, Lieutenant? I don't have the education they require." Tien put his coffee cup down gently. "I heard that most Air Force personnel are career servicemen who can make a lifelong career in the military. If you're interested, I think you could apply to transfer to the Air Force's security force. I'm pretty sure you could get it. But I don't know much about paperwork or applications, Lieutenant. I can help you with the paperwork and submit it through the chain of command to the General Staff. I found that the officers here are pretty good. I'm sure they'll approve your transfer." Chow's face lit up with joy. "If that happens, I'll be deeply grateful to you, Lieutenant." After saying that, Chow bowed his head slightly and changed his tone. "But if I leave, who will replace me here?" Hearing Chow's naive question, Tien couldn't help but laugh out loud. "When you leave, they'll assign someone else to replace you. No need to worry about that." That evening, Tan was scheduled for night watch duty at the guard post on the edge of the rubber forest. He was bent over, stuffing a blanket into his backpack to take with him to keep warm during the night watch, when Chow approached from behind. "Hey Tan, when are you heading out there? I'm brewing some coffee to bring along, so we can sit and chat." Tan straightened up and turned around. "In about 15 minutes. You're off duty tonight." "Yeah, but the weather's nice, so I thought I'd join you out there for some company." By 7:30 in the evening, it was getting dark. The clouds in the west had turned gray. A few lights outside the perimeter fence had been turned on, casting a faint, weak yellow glow like candles burning in the vast darkness. The surrounding forest was completely silent, a silence like that of someone slipping quietly toward death. Chow reached for the thermos and poured more coffee into a cup, then handed it to Tan. "Doesn't it seem particularly gloomy tonight?" "Out here in the forest, how could it not be gloomy? But I've lived here all my life, so I'm used to it." "You've been here for over 7 months now. How does it feel?" "I miss home, but I can't get leave to go back." Tan laughed teasingly. "Do you miss home or miss Nam? Just say it straight." "Yeah, I miss Nam a lot. But I don't know if she misses me." Tan, trying to sound worldly, advised, "Forget it. Girls these days are hard to trust. They're very picky. They'll go for someone rich and successful, not a poor soldier like us. You know, I once dated a girl named Tho near my neighborhood. At first, she claimed to love me a lot, but a few months later, she started seeing this guy too, because he bought a brand new Gobel motorcycle to take her out. I don't believe that. I think Nam really loves me. She embroidered a handkerchief for me as a keepsake when I went into the army. Oh, come on. 10 handkerchiefs like yours are worth nothing. Have you ever done anything with her?" "I've only kissed and touched her a bit. I didn't dare do anything improper." "Well, maybe we guys are shyer than girls about that sort of thing. Okay, let's drop that and move on. I want to tell you about what happened this morning." We hope you enjoyed the excerpt from this chapter. The complete audiobook of The Last Flight Out by Nguyen Van Ba can be purchased on platforms like Google Play and others. Please subscribe to this channel for more content like this.